Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to create your own on-scroll animations with anime.js. In this video I'm going to be showing you how this animation is created with anime.js so that by the end of this video you're going to be able to create your own custom on-scroll animations with anime.js. So let's get started. For this video I have all the code set up, and I'm just going to walk you through the code that I have written to create this animation. So let's start with the setup. So as you can see here, I have my three files, the CSS, the JavaScript, and also the HTML, all within the same folder. And within my index.html, I have linked my CSS to my HTML, and I've also linked my JavaScript to my HTML at the bottom here. And I've also embedded the CDN for the library that we're going to use in a moment here, that is the anime.js. Other than that, all I've done is I have put an SVG here, which represents this sphere here, in my body. And you can use anything you want instead of that sphere, so you can use a text or whatever you want. But for this video I use this sphere, and if you're wondering where you could get the code for that sphere, just go ahead to the code pen for the anime.js library, and you're gonna see the SVG that creates this sphere. So that's all about my my HTML. In my style sheet, all I've done is I have reset the margin and the padding for the whole document here. And I've also given my body a 3000 pixels of height so that I have some room to scroll so that my animation show up. I've also added a gradient here, which is the red one that you can see here, and I have justified the content to center so that the sphere shows up in the middle, and that's pretty much it. Alright, now let's observe our animation. So my animation basically starts at the top with an opacity of 0, and as I go down it gets darker and darker until it gets to an opacity of 1, and then it also moves down, and at about this point my animation stops or ends, and I retain my normal scroll, and you can see that the ball is going up as would happen in a normal scroll. So that's our animation. So from that we can see that we have to set the 2 points of our animation, which is the initial point, which is this one here, and the last point. And we have to set those 2 points before we can animate our animation. So let's do that. To set the initial point, all we need to do is we need to grab our element, which is this one here, and I've given it a class name of SVG, so I can grab it in here easily. So I grab the SVG and I've given it a padding from the top of 100, so you can see that it's not sticking to the top, it's spaced out from the top, and I've also given it an opacity of 0, and that's all about it. And if you're wondering about those properties, they are specific to the SVG. So if you're using a text or an image, you're not going to need those properties, so just ignore them. Okay, with that we have set our initial point. So now what we need to do is we need to set the last point, or the end point of our animation. And to do that we need to go to the anime.js library and see how to first what to use and how to set that point. Okay, so now if we go all the way down to the to what's called Vseek, I missed it. Okay, so this method here, this method is called the Seek method, and what it does is that as I move this slider forwards, I get some animation, and when I move it backwards, I get a different animation. So basically what's happening here is as I move my slider back and forth, I get my objects animating. And this is fundamentally what we want to do in our on-scroll animations. The only difference is that I want my elements to animate on scroll. So as I scroll down, as you can see the scroll bar here, as it moves up or down, I want my animation to take place. So this is the best tool that we can use to create such an effect. So if we take a look at the code example, we can see that it is divided into two sections. The first one is where the properties of the end state are being set, and the second section, which is this one here, is where the all the methods and stuff are being used. So if I go to my script.js, you can see that I have created something similar here. So I have basically copied all of that, okay, and pasted it in here, and I've removed all the unnecessary properties. So I've only focused on what I need. Okay, so let's take a look here. I kept the targets because this is necessary. I need to specify which elements I'm targeting, and I just given it the class name for my element. And I've also specified the opacity to be 1, because that's what I want the opacity to be at the end of my animation. And I've given it a translate y, and translate y is basically the distance of the element from the top of the page. So padding from the top or translate y can be used interchangeably. The people who created the anime.js library chose to call the padding from the top translate y, so they are two different names for the same thing basically. And I've also kept the easing, and I've set it to ease in out sign because I think this one is cool. And I've also set the autoplay to false. Alright, so that's how you basically set your end point. But before we go any further, I just want to explain what is happening in here. So first we are calling a function called anime, and the only reason we have access to this function is because we have already embedded the CDN for that library. So when we call anime, we have access to it thanks to that CDN. And that anime function takes an object as an argument. And that object is going to contain all the properties that I want my end state to have, like the opacity and translate y. And I have to just pass them in as key value pairs, as you can see here, and that's it. But before we finish, I also assign this whole function to a variable called animation, so that I could use that whole thing later in my code by just typing animation. So with that out of the way, the last thing we need to do is we need to now animate our animation. So we have set the initial point and the ending point, and the only thing left is to actually animate it. So if we go back to the documentation, we see here that there is a complex code in here, but if we take a look at the animation.seek here, okay, we can see that it seems that it is taking a number. Okay, so if I just comment that out, let me just first, I'm just gonna comment this out. And I'm just gonna type in animation and I'm just gonna give it a number. Okay, so let's say 500. So if I save and go back to my animation and refresh, you can see that my element shows up right about here with an opacity of maybe 50%. So if I change this to maybe 100 and I save, go back here and refresh, you can see, I don't know if you can see that, it's not that clear, but there is almost a shadow. So let me try that with a 200. I think it's clearer now. So you can see that it has an opacity of maybe 20%. If I give this maybe an 800, I think it's going to be way darker, but it's not going to be 100% dark. So you can see that it's dark, but not 100% darker. And if I give it 1000, and refresh, is going to be, the darkest. And if I give it any number above 1,000, maybe 1,500, nothing's going to change, So this portion of my code is working, so let me just get it back to maybe 400 so that it shows up on my page. Okay, so this portion of my code is working, and the seek method is a method that I have to call on my endpoint, and I have to give it a number, and that number is going to give me back, or is going to give back a frame that corresponds to whatever number that I pass into that seek method. All right, and we have seen that when we pass a 500, we get a frame that is at the middle of my animation, where the opacity is 50%. If I pass it a number of 200, it's going to give me a frame at that 200 number, or a frame that corresponds to that 200, so that the opacity is not it's not that dark, basically 20%. And if I give it 1,000, I'm getting the frame where the opacity is 1. Okay, so now if I just use this animation.seek, I don't get any animations, and the reason is because this is not enough. If we go back to the documentation, you can see here that this animation.seek is wrapped in a callback function. And that callback function is basically firing every single time I move this slider back and forth. So it's basically listening to the movement of this slider. So I need something similar in my code. But instead, I want it to fire every single time I scroll up or down. And for that reason, I'm going to use the window.onscroll. And I'm just going to console log the text hello. Now if I save and refresh, and I open up my my console, and then I scroll, I see that I get hello, as you can see here, every single time I move down or up. So this means that this function is listening to my scroll, and it's firing every single time I'm scrolling. So now we should move this animation.seek into our callback function. And let's just uncomment this one here. Now if I save and refresh, we can see that I get the same frame, which is this one here in the middle, with the 40% opacity. So I still don't get my animation, although I know that this animation.seek is firing every single time I'm moving up or down the page, but still it is not firing. And the reason why is because I'm giving it the same number every single time. So although this function is firing every single time I'm scrolling, but it is firing with the same exact number, and therefore it is giving me the same frame every single time. And in order for me to make this work, I need to supply it or give it a dynamically changing number. And for that reason, as you saw in the code above, I used something like window.pageYOffset. So now if I console log the window.pageYOffset to just see what it is, and that's not what I want the Y offset. So now if I save and go and refresh, and now if I scroll, you can see that I start from 1 and the distance increasing. So it basically measures the distance from the top of the page to where I am at right now. So if I go down and down and down, it increases, and if I go up, it decreases all the way until I get back to 0. So the window.pageYOffset is a flexible or a dynamically changing value. So now if I pass it in my seek method, if I just copy it and paste it in here, and again if I save and refresh, you can see that my animation is showing up right now and it's animating. Well, it's not animating the way I want it to, but at least my animation is working, which means that we are doing the right thing. So the last tweak that is left for me to do is, well, let me just remove that and this as well. The last tweak is I need to play around with this value here, because remember, the window.pageyOffset is basically a number, and the seek method takes a number between 0 and 1000 in order for the animation to show up. So I can also play around with this value. So remember that this is a number. The window.pageyOffset is a number, and I can divide that number by something or multiply it by something. If you divide it, it's gonna become slower, and if you multiply it by something, it's gonna move quicker. So that's why I have multiplied it by 1.85, and I got to this value from by trial and error. So so you have to try out different values and play around with your code until you get the result you want. So now if I just multiply it by 1.85, and I think the animation is not really working well because I've opened up my console. So if I just close it, and now if I scroll down, you can see that I get the exact same animation that I had in the beginning. And this is, of course, the exact same code. This code here is the exact same code as this one here. So just keep in mind that not only that you need to call this animation.seek every single time you move up or down the page, but also you need to give it a dynamically changing value. And you can also add a number, meaning multiply it by something or divide it by something, so that you make your animation the way you want to. Okay, so to wrap up, all you need to do is you need to grab your element and you give it a starting point, and you specify all the properties of that starting point, and then you use the anime function that the anime.js gives you to set all the properties of the end state or the end point of your animation. And after setting those 2 points, all you need to do is you need to call the animation.seek method within a callback function that fires onScroll, and you have to supply it with a dynamically changing number. So this could be anything, but for the scroll, this is the best one I found. But if you are using something else, you can give it a different number or value. So that's all about animating your animation, and you can also, as I said, play around with it with this number here until you get the desired result. So yeah, that's all about it. Now you can create your own custom animations using the properties that you want and animating them the way you want on scroll. And that's all about it. Now you can go ahead and create your own custom animations that animate on scroll using all the different properties that the anime.js library provides. Okay guys, if you like this video, please leave a like. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. And if you think someone will benefit from this video, feel free to share it with them. And please subscribe if you want to see more of those videos, because I'm planning on releasing videos every single week about such topics that covers front-end development. So you subscribing means that you want to see more of this content. So yeah, that's all about it. See you in the next one.